Hello, and thank you for joining us today on Investing Sense. My name is Jake Szulinski, and I am a certified financial planner here in Wayne, Pennsylvania. And on Investing Sense, we like to bring financial topics and education to our local community. And today we have a wonderful guest and a wonderful topic. Ms. Susan Wendling, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you for having me.
Susan, you are from Cabrini University, and we're going to be talking a little bit about financial aid today.
Right.
Well, again, I appreciate your time and I appreciate you being with us. So tell us a little bit about yourself. How long have you been in the academic world, and what have you been doing for your career that led you into financial aid?
Okay. Well, I have been in higher education for 26 years now.
Okay.
The last 2.5 at Cabrini University.
Great.
Which is a wonderful small liberal arts college right here in Radnor, Pennsylvania. My career really just started as looking for a job. Had kids who were going to college. A college was a great place to get a job. Once you're there for a few years, you may be eligible for free tuition. So that is
not a bad idea.
That it was my plan since I had 5 children.
That's great. And you loved it so much you stayed in it.
I stayed in it. Well, it's helping people to understand the process.
Right.
You know, people, and one of my main things was that if I can help someone else's child who is away from home understand things,
right,
hopefully where my children are, someone is helping them out too.
It's very nice. We're going to dig into a little bit of that today because, like you said, it is a process and there's a lot that goes into it. And I think there's a lot of, I think you would agree with me, misconceptions. There's a lot of things that, maybe people assume about this process. And I think we're going to talk about some of those topics today and clear up some of those things. So tell us a little bit more about Cabrini. So what's the enrollment there? How does that look right now? Undergrad, grad?
Okay. So currently Cabrini has about 1,550 full-time undergraduate students.
Okay.
We have about 525 graduate, doctoral, and continuing education students. So some part-time undergraduate students also.
That's great.
It is a residential liberal arts campus.
Right.
Started by the Sisters of the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart.
Yes, yeah.
So you will see in our logos and things, we do have the heart there. Okay. What we do is we allocate and we try to teach the students social justice so that they can go out in the world and be better people and help the world that way.
That's great. That's very great. So let's dig into a little bit. So financial aid is going to be our main point of topics today. So what is financial aid? If you're just trying to explain financial aid in a sentence or two, how do you explain that to somebody?
So financial aid is basically broken up into 2 sections. There is merit-based financial aid and there's need-based financial aid.
Okay.
So merit-based, or if you want to say free aids, grants,
right,
scholarships. There are usually scholarships and grants from any of the colleges that the students would apply to. Mm-hmm. There are federal grants, there are state grants. That is all free money. Right. That is the money. If you see grant or scholarship behind it, you absolutely want that money. You want to accept it. There's also a lot of, from little locals, from the different organizations where parents may work, there are grants and scholarships that are offered.
Sure.
The need-based aid is more, not so much on the academic end of it. So when the students fill out the FAFSA, which I'm sure we'll talk about,
absolutely,
that would say whether or not they would be eligible for any need-based aid.
Okay.
There's also self-help aid, which would be your loans,
right,
and would be student worker positions,
okay,
where the students would work and get money, get paid for that.
Sure, sure. So you did mention the FAFSA, so we'll start with that a little bit. I'll kind of give it in 2 ways. Is the FAFSA where somebody should start, or where do you maybe recommend somebody start in this process? So you just named a lot, the state, the local, the federal aid. There's a lot of different categories here. If I'm sitting there and I have a child that's maybe sophomore, junior in high school, I assume that's probably when you start thinking about it.
Junior is when you start probably looking at schools.
Right. So where do we start to start looking at all these different categories? Is there one specific spot, or do we start with the FAFSA? How do we navigate that?
So usually a lot of the college guidance offices in the high schools do have a lot of this information.
Okay.
They have a lot of free searches that are secured searches for the students. One thing that people do want to understand is that the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid.
Okay.
You should never pay anyone to complete the FAFSA for you.
Okay.
You do it all online. like I said, it is free. There are guidance step by step, what information they're looking for. Basically, you're going to put on information about your household side, how
Right.
many are going to be in college for that upcoming year. Now, a few years back, FAFSA even had an agreement, or the Department of Ed had an agreement with the IRS that you can check a box and give permission for the IRS to give the Department of Ed your income information.
So that would just streamline that right into it
Absolutely.
easier.
You don't have to worry about, am I putting the right box from my 1040, in this line?
Gotcha.
It's there. It'll be done there for you.
Okay.
So once the schools get this information, it comes back with what they call an EFC, which is an estimated family contribution.
Okay.
Now, that does not mean that's what the families are going to pay for college, but what it does mean is that that is a number that the federal government uses as a guideline to see whether students are eligible for federal grants.
Okay.
The states also use that. Now, most of the states, once you complete the FAFSA, you're finished. In the
Okay.
state of Pennsylvania, when you complete it, it's going to prompt you and say, do you want to complete the Pennsylvania state grant application? It'll take you right to that site and you can complete that one-time application for them. The FAFSA you have to do every year. It's a renewal.
Okay.
And you go in and renew. All
Right.
you do is update your personal information.
Right.
So that's great. If the students are not in Pennsylvania, they just want to check with their state Department of Education to see about guidelines
Perfect.
and deadlines.
Who should everybody be filling out a FAFSA? Or, we have some clients that are extremely high net worth, extremely high wage earners, and they've come to me and said, I'm not going to qualify for anything ever at any point, no matter what it is. Should they still fill it out, or is there some guidance there that you could say, yes, if you're over a certain amount, don't worry about it?
Well, my suggestion is that, when families say, I'm not going to get anything, at the very least, the student would be eligible for an unsubsidized federal direct loan.
Okay.
So what that means is that, and if the student doesn't want to accept it, they don't have to accept it.
Okay.
But they would be eligible for that. One way, and just in my little section of financial aid world, one way or advice that I would say is, if the student does take that loan, then what happens is when they start paying that back, it's a great way for them to establish credit.
Okay.
It really doesn't make a difference if the parents help them pay it back or the student helps pay it back, but it is a great way to establish credit.
In their name, and as long
In
as it's
their
getting
name.
paid, it's
Correct.
it's going to be
Correct.
A good thing.
And it's not, they don't have to start paying it back until 6 months after graduation.
Okay.
Or if they stop going at least half time. So at the very minimum, that's what the student would get.
Right, that makes sense. What are some common misconceptions you hear about the FAFSA, or just maybe the process in general? I know there's a lot out there. What do you want to clear up a little bit about that process, or specifically about the FAFSA?
Well, one thing is that if you have multiple students, each student does have FAFSA in their name.
Okay.
Now, granted, the parental information will be the same, but sometimes one student may work, one student may not work.
Sure.
So the Department of Ed does look at that as potential income to help pay for their tuition.
Okay.
The other thing is, I think I had already mentioned the EFC. That is a guideline. It really doesn't mean that that's all that the family is going to need to pay for their education. So the best thing would be is, once the schools get the FAFSA, they send the students out an award letter or a financial aid package.
Right.
Best thing I can say is, if families have any questions whatsoever, to contact their admissions office or the financial aid office.
Right.
That's what we're there for. We're there to help answer their questions. No question is too simple or silly. That's what
Right.
our job is. That's what we're there for.
So what does that usually look like? Would they set up an appointment with somebody like yourself, or is it more a phone call? I mean, I know we're in weird times during this COVID world, but you receive that financial aid package and you do have a bunch of questions. Does it make sense to schedule an appointment, or do you just call in and kind of have that list of questions ready?
So the first thing I can say, I know with our school at Cabrini, with our financial aid award letter, we send out a fact sheet with all kinds of information, links to our website, which has an abundance of information.
Okay.
Most cases now that we're dealing with in this time that we're in, parents will call. We'll set up Teams meetings. We'll set up Zoom meetings if that's what they would like. But most of the time we can go back and forth with the questions. If it's a simple question, maybe an email, but most times one question, the answer may lead to another question. So phone calls are really a good source.
That makes sense. Is there a certain, so we'll stick with Cabrini because I know that you have more privy information with them. Is there a certain percentage of students that are going to receive financial aid, or is it all dependent on the amount of applications? What's Cabrini's outlook on it before the semester starts? Do they have an allotted amount? How does that get figured out?
So right now, 99% of our full-time undergraduate students receive some type of financial aid.
Okay. And
Now,
that includes grant, scholarship,
loans, yes.
all of it. So somebody has 99% of people have some of that.
Right.
At least one.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things that we do hear, sometimes we'll hear from families, which of course we cannot discuss other students' information, but they'll say, my neighbor down the street was offered money from Cabrini and they're not coming. Can we have their money too? Schools are always going to put out more money than they have because they know that every student is not going to be able to come to their school.
Sure.
So that's one thing. If one of the things that we do say at Cabrini, especially in these times, if the family gets the award letter and they look at it and they really, really want to come to our school, but they just can't see how it can work, we ask them to reach out to us. We have an appeals committee. We meet once a week.
Okay.
We go over the circumstance. We look at the information. We look at, our scholarships in line with other schools like Cabrini.
Sure.
And in most cases this year, we're happy to say, yes, we're finding that we are.
That makes sense. So you mentioned something there. I was actually just going to ask about it. So you get this financial aid package and you kind of start crunching your numbers and maybe you figure out, I don't know if I could really make this work. So you mentioned the appeals committee, which is nice. I think we can understand that, hey, maybe we can go and get a little bit more or something, you want to add in there that maybe isn't on paper.
Right.
But where else? What other resources? So if you go to your guidance counselor, you go and you fill out the FAFSA and you kind of circle those wagons there. If you still need a little bit more, what do you recommend for students to go out and start looking for and looking at to get excess grants, scholarships, loans, whatever it may be?
It's amazing the amount of money that really is out there that students and families just don't know about.
Sure.
That's why the guidance counselor, and I know this year has probably been tough with students, for the most part, going to school remotely,
Right.
but there are a lot of resources. One of the things that I really do want to caution is that before you give personal information, social security number, date of birth, things like that, really need to make sure that it's a legitimate source. On our website and on a lot of colleges and universities' websites, there's FastWeb, there's a lot of different federal searches that are definitely secure. Parents' jobs, unions, supermarkets, a lot of them have money, even if it's $1,000 a year, that could cover the books for the year.
Right.
There's, like I said, the federal sites. There's an awful lot out there that the students can. Sports clubs.
Right.
It's amazing. You could have someone who is, has blonde hair, blue eyes, is from ancestors from another country. There's a lot of different things out there that you can search on.
Gotcha.
That they give money for.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, it seems like there are a lot of options, and it makes sense to take the time to go out and try to look at some of these if you're gonna want some of this money to help, because we know it's not cheap these days.
Right. And one thing I can definitely say, freshman year is the most expensive year.
Sure.
Not only do you have to buy everything for the dorm room and all, there's certain things that schools, including Cabrini, offer for upperclassmen that are not offered for freshmen.
Right.
So there are additional funds from the school and from outside sources once the students are sophomore, juniors, or seniors.
So that is one thing I wanted to ask you about, is the structure of that. So, we think about it and we say, okay, here's some money that I'm going to get, whether it be grant, loan, whatever it may be, going into freshman year. But this is usually either a 2 or a 4-year commitment with most of these colleges and universities. How does Cabrini structure it? How do you know that you're going to be set for that sophomore, junior, senior year? Do they give you an amount up front to say, hey, this is what it's going to be for each year? And then, like you said, I know you can reapply for FAFSA and other things each year, but how does that work?
So the money directly from Cabrini, the merit money, is usually, you're getting X amount of dollars over 4 years, so divided by those 4 years.
Sure.
That usually does not change. As long as the students are making academic progress, that money should stay the same.
Or could go up, I'm assuming.
Or it could go up if
Okay.
they get additional scholarships for
Okay.
juniors, seniors. Usually the merit that you come in with is what you're going to stay with, but there could be things that are stacked upon that.
Okay.
The need-based aid may change each year depending upon the information on the FAFSA,
Right.
which is another reason if the families do have the need that they want to complete the FAFSA, so the school has that information.
Right.
One thing I can say, Cabrini froze their costs of tuition, room and board for the next academic year because of the times
great.
that we're in. So, some schools are doing that where you have that you're, whatever the tuition was this year is exactly what it's going to be next year, just for planning purposes.
Every little bit helps.
Yes.
It's very nice of them to do. I
Yes.
think it's a great way to show that you're trying to help the local community and just the academic world in general.
Right, right.
That's great. Let's go back into the FAFSA a little bit because we just talked about it again. What are the most looked at factors on the FAFSA? So I know there's a lot of information that goes on there, and I know you said you can get it, IRS can streamline it, so obviously income is being looked at, assets are being looked at. Are those the top two?
Right, so what they look at is they're going to look at the number in your household.
Okay.
And the number of students who are going to be in college for that year.
Okay.
So you could have one family that would basically have, maybe there was one student in college and they really didn't get much need-based aid the first 2 years, and then all of a sudden here comes child number 2 and number 3 right behind them. Well, their assets and their income are changing, obviously, because it's dividing over multiple students in higher education.
Sure.
So FAFSA looks at the household, the number in college. It's also going to look at the income, the adjusted gross income, if there are any assets, any savings. They do look at that, so they ask those questions. What the family's going to put on the FAFSA is the information as of the day that they're completing the FAFSA. We know that savings is going to change, it's going to fluctuate. Sure. So that's something that you want to bring to the attention of the school if those changes are made.
Right.
Trying to think of what else it covers. But it can, like I said, it can change from year to year based on the income.
I know from my experience in working with clients, there are a lot of things like 529s and even other accounts that can either be titled in the child's name versus the parent's name versus the grandparent's name. Do you run into that a lot on looking at why something should be out of the child's name versus in the child's name and how much that affects them on the FAFSA?
Well, if it's in the child's name, it has to be listed on the FAFSA. There is a section asking for the student's income and assets and the parent's income and assets.
Okay. So yeah, there's definitely a few things to look at there possibly with making sure that you don't maybe pile a bunch of money into your child's name early on in their life. I'm sure everybody's situation is a little bit different, but if you're looking for financial aid, that's something you may want to be aware of heading into that process. What can this financial aid be used for? So are we talking about everything and anything when you're the grants, scholarships, aid, so books, room and board, tuition, all the above? Are there restrictions usually on any of that, or?
So usually the institutional's aid can only be used towards tuition and fees.
Okay.
It usually does not go towards room and board. Now, most schools do not give full rides or the full coverage for the student. So the average package at Cabrini before federal loans is a little bit above $20,000.
Okay, and that's for 4 years.
Well, that would be 1 year. So the first year
okay.
will be $20,000.
Gotcha.
So the tuition and fees this year and next year are $33,845. So if you're taking that $20,000 off, that's what you're going to be looking at.
Okay.
Now that's just tuition and fees. You're going to add room and board onto there. So any of the federal loans, grants, state loans, grants, any outside money that is coming in, that can all be used for the balance of the tuition and towards the room and board.
Okay.
There are some scholarships that are just for books. So when they are, the students can have them, they would go ahead and they would purchase their books on the campus store. So basically the financial aid can be used for anything. The only thing is that usually schools do not offer more than just tuition of their own institutional money.
Okay. If we're in some weird times right now with obviously COVID, and we're getting out of it, which is good. It looks like we're getting close to the end of the tunnel. But the last year, I'm sure for you and everybody at the schools, whether it be Cabrini and others, has been a wild ride, to say the least. And for the students as well, whether it be incoming freshmen or people that are already in, kind of messing up their routine. What happens with some of these financial aid packages if they have to take an off year? Or, for example, some of these, like you said, can be used for room and board, but yet everybody's virtually, can those packages be maybe used for next year? Does some of that money get refunded? How does that all work right now? And I know it's going to be different probably from institution to institution, so we'll talk about Cabrini specifically.
Right. So the aid that the students do receive, is per year. If a student would have to defer, and let's just say they're not going to come in the fall, but they're going to come in the spring, their package is going to be there for them. Obviously, they would get, the aid is usually broken up by semester. So let's just say you're offered $20,000 a year, it's 10 in the fall, 10 in the spring.
10%.
So that would be that. So if we offer the student 8 semesters coming in, we will give them the 8 semesters coming in.
Okay.
Even if it takes them, 5 years to complete that, we will give them aid for 8 semesters. So if they defer for a full year and they don't go anywhere else, usually that package is there waiting for them.
Right.
As far as, like you had mentioned that, the student decides they're coming to school, they're going to be a resident, COVID hits, most of their classes are virtual. So why are they going to come to campus and pay that additional money?
Sure.
So what happens with there is if the students, like last year and again this year, if the students had paid their money for their room and board and something happened and the campuses had to go on lockdown, or the campuses, the students couldn't reside there, what Cabrini did was if they were graduating students, we gave them a refund on that money.
Okay.
If they were returning students, what we did was we allowed them to the opportunity to allow us to hold the money towards their fall semester.
Right.
So it was, because in a lot of cases it was loans or it was they just made payments, that was the case.
Sure.
Obviously, if the family needed that money back, we would definitely give them that money refunded back.
Right.
But it's not, the schools definitely made allowances and students weren't there, we weren't going to charge them for
Sure.
room
Yeah,
and board.
it seems fair. Along those same lines, I feel like summer sessions have grown in popularity over the years. I mean, again, maybe not in this past year because of the odd circumstances we were in, but on regular years, summer sessions, we see a lot of people attending those.
Right.
How does that work with the financial aid? Does that just factor into it's just another semester, and if you want to use part of your aid towards that, or are there additional options if you're doing summer sessions or winter sessions or whatever it may be?
So usually what happens is for the full-time undergraduate students, they use the majority of their aid in the fall and spring semester. So they have maxed that out. If we have federal Pell eligible students, there is a year-round Pell. So we do a calculation and they may get some federal grant money for the summertime as long as they're going half-time, which is the 6 credits. At Cabrini, if the full-time undergraduate students take the courses in the summertime, we do offer them at a discounted price. The first 6 credits are a discounted price. So that does help the students to either catch up or to get ahead in their education.
All right, let's go into a little bit about, we talked a lot about it, and I know there's probably more that we could talk about there, but let's talk about the academic requirements. Are they usually tied to a lot of these, aid packages, whether it be grants, scholarships, and the loans? Do we have to hit a certain number on GPA or hit a certain number of credits? Does that all get factored in?
So usually with the institutional money, yes, it is tied if it's a merit base. So the students do want to have coming in, it's tiered. So obviously the students who have, a 3.5, a 4.0 coming from high school are going to get more academic money than a student who has a lower GPA.
Sure.
We do require that the students keep at least a 2.0, which is a C average.
Okay.
So they really should be doing that,
Right.
For the amount of money that they are putting in the time and the energy into this. So they should do that.
Sure.
As far as the federal aid, the students do have to make satisfactory academic progress at the end of each academic year, or they may not be eligible for federal aid. And this is really to protect them from taking loans or the grants that could be going for other students, because they have to show that they are serious and they are making that progress.
That makes sense. Will that also help if they want to apply for more? I'm assuming if they can boost their grades up each year, or
for the federal, no, because the federal is basically on the income. For the academics, yes. Like I had mentioned, Cabrini has some grants and things that are offered for upperclassmen. And those are usually based on grades. So currently, right now, we're waiting. Grades were due on Monday, so we're waiting to see, and then we can award the additional aid for next year for the students.
It's a lot. It's a lot for you said you had 5 kids?
Five
so
are out.
You went through it. You went through it, and you know what these parents are doing, sitting at home and stressing about this. And I know this is a broad question, but what type of advice, as we finish up here, can you give them heading into this process? I know we give a lot of the details and the semantics behind it, but what advice would you give a parent that has their first child or first couple children heading into college on this process?
I would definitely suggest doing the FAFSA. Like I said, if the very minimum, the students would be eligible for the unsubsidized loan. Definitely work with the high schools, have the students get interested, look on these websites, do that. Again, caution, do not give personal information unless you really check into it. Talk to people. I mean, sometimes you talk to family members or neighbors who have gone through it, and You might get good information, you might get bad information.
Sure.
But that's why the schools are there. That's why the admissions counselors are there, the financial aid counselors are there, because we've been through it for the most part, if not with children, for ourselves.
Sure.
We know what's going on. We can definitely guide people. Ask questions. We'll go through the information with you and get you on the right track.
That's great. So don't be afraid to reach out and ask for some help.
Absolutely not. That's, yep.
Well, that's good. Well, Susan, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. A lot of great information that I think is really going to be helpful to our local community here. So we appreciate you, and we appreciate Cabrini letting you take the time to come with us today.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you. Thank you again for joining us today on Investing Sense. We hope to see you next time.